Deaths in Glenmorach Manor, a fiction novel. Written by Shirley, read by Sir Lawrence Olivier. This audiobook was narrated using synthetic voice technology provided by 11 Labs. Chapter 16. Soft tick of the grandfather clock was the only sound that accompanied me as I went over the case files again. The lingering scent of cigar smoke reminded me of a habit I just couldn't quit. My fingers tapped nervously on the edge of the wooden desk, matching the unease in my chest. It had been 10 days since Benjamin Wallace was found dead in the library, and now the autopsy report was here. I leaned back in my chair just as the door creaked open. Inspector Harris walked in, his serious expression showing no sign of relief. I gestured for him to take a seat across from me, and he did. Unbuttoning his coat with deliberate care, Inspector Harris said in his usual clipped tone, sliding the thick manila envelope toward me. "Mr. Owen, the report's in. I'll let you have a look, but I think you'll find it curious." I nodded and reached for the envelope. As I pulled the papers free, my eyes immediately scanned the first lines. My gaze tightened with the first few words. Cause of death. Poisoning. My pulse quickened, and I looked up sharply at Harris. Poison. Are you sure about this? He gave me a serious nod. The dagger wound in Benjamin's back wasn't fatal, Mr. Owen. It was a superficial injury, likely inflicted post-mortem. The autopsy and toxicology results are clear. The lad was poisoned before anything else. I sat up straighter, my mind whirring as I quickly read the next section. What kind of poison are we talking about? Harris glanced at the paper before him. Aphrodisiac berries poisoning, to be precise. From a plant called mandrake. His voice had a strange weight to it as he spoke the name. I gave a soft whistle. Mandrake. The very name sent a chill down my spine. Known for their dangerous properties, its berries were often used for a variety of purposes, some medicinal, others far more sinister. But poisoning someone with a method that demanded a certain kind of knowledge, a delicate touch. I muttered, staring at the toxicology report in my hands. Mandrake. Not the kind of poison you'd just stumble upon. This wasn't random. Harris replied. You're right. The root, seed, and leaves of mandrake are very poisonous. It was likely ground up and mixed into a drink or food. From the blood and urine tests, we can confirm it entered his system several hours before his death. I leaned back in my chair, fingers pressed to my temples. Who would have access to such a thing? This poisonous plant only grows in specific areas with a supporting climate, such as regions around the Mediterranean. A common criminal unlikely knows where to find or use them effectively. Harris shifted uneasily. That's the question, isn't it? We both fell into silence, each of us processing the implications. Benjamin's death had been more than just a tragic loss for Lord Wallace. It had become a tangled web of deception. The young heir was stabbed in the back, but ultimately, it was the poison that had sealed his fate. I broke the silence. So, what does this tell us about the killer? It suggests someone with knowledge of rare and dangerous plants. Harris replied. Possibly someone close to him. Someone who could have easily slipped it into his food or drink without arousing suspicion. I nodded, my thoughts racing. Someone who could easily move around him. Perhaps someone at the dinner. Harris's brow furrowed. You're suggesting someone from the inside. Someone trusted. I said, my voice more certain now. I think it's the most likely scenario. This wasn't a random act. Benjamin didn't die in some alley or street corner. He died in a place of supposed safety, with someone close enough to him to carry out such an act without raising suspicion. I looked back down at the report, tapping the paper in thought. I'll need to question everyone at that dinner. Every word, every glance, every movement. They could be the key. And what about the dagger? Harris asked, leaning forward. You don't think it's related? I shook my head. Unlikely. If the dagger wound wasn't fatal. But it was likely staged to mislead us. Someone wanted to make it look like a simple stabbing using that specific family heirloom inherited dagger for generations, perhaps to throw us off the scent of the real cause, and the culprit is within the family. There was a moment of silence between us, heavy with the weight of the situation. Mr. Owen, do you think this poisonous plant still has a chance to grow in the countryside areas around here? I hesitated. I'm not sure. The climate in Scotland is quite different from the Mediterranean's. Even the summer months, July and August, which are the warmest and sunniest, with average temperatures around 15 degrees Celsius, are still considered wetter and colder than the Mediterranean climate. Unless these plants are grown under specific treatment, like in a greenhouse or something where they can control the proper temperature. Anyway, I plan to search the areas surrounding the countryside where it could be growing. This murder seems more methodical. This is planned and calculated. Inspector Harris's eyes narrowed. Then we need to proceed with caution. Someone's got their sights on more than just the air. I stood, pacing toward the window. The rain outside pattered gently against the glass. I need to find who's behind this, I murmured, and I need to do it quickly. As I stared out at the darkened landscape, my mind began to piece together the fragments of the case, each piece adding a new layer of complexity. Benjamin's death had not been the result of a random act of violence, but it was far more deliberate. Part 2. The clock ticked steadily, a comforting rhythm that couldn't quite quell the unease gnawing at me. I sat there, reflecting on both reports, the very poisonous plant, the symptoms, and the strange timeline that was beginning to form in my mind. The fog of suspicion clouded everything. Benjamin's death wasn't as simple as it seemed at first glance. The poison had taken its toll before the stabbing, before the body crumpled onto the desk in that grotesque final position. It had rendered him weak and likely confused, or even lost consciousness. I couldn't stop thinking of the moments before his collapse. That explained the complaints of a terrible headache and the dizziness he'd mentioned to us before the dinner had ended. He had suffered in silence, not understanding that he was slowly being consumed by the poison. The stabbing didn't come until after the poison had done its dirty work, an easy way for the murderer to end the young heir's life without any self-defense from Benjamin. The puzzle was slowly clicking into place. Benjamin had been poisoned intentionally while he was enjoying his dinner, and that poison, acting so swiftly, had likely overwhelmed him right at the dinner table. The knife lodged in his back was a distraction, a final touch to ensure we were left guessing. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something. There was no way the food he was eating that night had been the source of the poison. He hadn't been the only one eating. His guests, his family, would have suffered the effects too, but none of them had. The only plausible explanation was that Benjamin's plate, bowl, utensils, or his wine glass, those had been tainted, specifically for him. Someone had poisoned him directly. He was the targeted victim. I stood up, the weight of the theory pressing on my chest, and began pacing. I needed more answers. The family had gathered at the dinner, but the servants? They were the key. They were the ones who prepared the food, set the table, and brought the wine. Among them, there would be someone who had access to the dining area, someone who knew exactly where Benjamin was going to sit. A well-placed servant could have tampered with any of it. I needed to find out who had arranged Benjamin's place setting, who had been responsible for handling his plate, bowl, and glass. And that meant I needed to speak with Mr. Morrison, the butler of the Wallace family. I tugged on the bell pull that led to the servants' quarters, summoning Mr. Morrison. Moments later, he appeared at my door, slowly opened it, and greeted me. "Good evening, Mr. Owen. Do you need to speak with me?" Mr. Morrison entered the room, his tone courteous but distant, the mark of a man who had long been in service to the Wallace family. "Good evening, Mr. Morrison. Please have a seat," I answered, keeping my tone neutral. "I trust you're well. I have a few questions regarding the dinner on the night before Mr. Benjamin's death, specifically regarding the preparations. I was hoping you could help me with a few details." "Of course, sir. I'm at your disposal. What do you need to know?" said Mr. Morrison. I asked, getting straight to the point. I have to know who was responsible for setting the table for the dinner event that evening before Mr. Benjamin got killed. More importantly, who had the duty of handling the dinnerware, silverware, and glasses for everyone? There was a pause, a silence just long enough for me to wonder if he was reconsidering his response. Then he spoke. Well, Mrs. Thompson, the head of servants, oversaw the kitchen and dining staff, and she was in charge of organizing the service that evening. As for the specifics, she was also in charge of laying the table and ensuring the dinnerware, silverware, and crystal glasses were in place. She's quite meticulous, I must say. I nodded, though he couldn't see it. Then I asked him again. Mrs. Thompson. And did anyone else assist her with the table arrangements? Mr. Morrison explained. There were a few other staff members moving around the dining room, but as for the dinnerware itself, Mrs. Thompson was the one who made sure everything was set properly for each guest. While taking a note, I asked him again. I have one more question, Mr. Morrison. Was there any specific seating arrangement for the family and guests? Did everyone have assigned spots around the dining table? Mr. Morrison replied, his face showing a hint of confusion at my inquiry. Yes, sir. Everyone has their designated seat for special occasions. Did anyone assist her with placing the wine glasses or the food on the table for Mr. Benjamin? I asked, narrowing in on the most important detail. Morrison hesitated again. His voice was quiet now. Not to my knowledge. She was alone placing the dinnerware and glasses, and as far as I know, she had no helper at that time. I leaned forward, my brow furrowed. And do you remember where exactly Benjamin was seated that evening? Mr. Morrison said, his voice becoming slightly more thoughtful. Yes, sir. He was seated at the right side of the head of the table, as his usual designated seat in every formal dinner event. I paused, feeling the gears in my mind turning. It was becoming clearer now. Someone had either knowingly or unknowingly placed the poison on Benjamin's wine glass, or perhaps smeared it on the surface of his plate. The fact that Benjamin was the only one to show symptoms before the others, it was no coincidence. Whoever had arranged that dinner had deliberately targeted him. Thank you, Mr. Morrison. I'll need to speak with Mrs. Thompson next. Will you please let her know to come to see me now? I said, my voice low and steady. Very well, Mr. Owen. I'll make sure Mrs. Thompson is available to speak with you. If there's anything else you require, I'll always be here to help. Morrison said, his voice betraying no emotion. I finished my question with Mr. Morrison, a deep sense of resolve settling over me. The walls were closing in, and the answers were within reach. Now I just had to find the one who'd had the opportunity to poison Benjamin Wallace, the servant who had the chance to slip something deadly into his glass, or on his plate. I was convinced that the poison had been smeared on Benjamin's dinnerware, possibly on the surface of his dinner plate or on the sides of his glasses. It made sense, since Benjamin was the only one of us who had been afflicted by the poison that night. Mrs. Thompson, the head of the servants, was responsible for the arrangement of the dining table that fateful evening. She was fully aware of each person's seat, the dinnerware they were going to use, and the wine glasses that would touch their lips. It was time to speak with her. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Mr. Owen, Mrs. Thompson is here to see you, Mr. Morrison announced, standing in the doorway. Thank you. Please send her in, I said, putting the report down. Mrs. Thompson entered, her presence steady, though the lines on her face were etched with the weight of grief. Her dark blonde hair, tied back in a tight bun, made her appear older than her years, but her sharp eyes still held the precision of someone who had spent decades managing every detail of the household. She said to me politely, Mr. Owen, you wish to speak with me? I replied, gesturing toward the chair across from my desk. Yes, Mrs. Thompson. Please, have a seat. I need to ask you some questions about the night of Mr. Benjamin's death. She nodded solemnly, her hands folded neatly in her lap as she settled into the chair. I opened my question. Mrs. Thompson, how long have you been working for the Wallace family? I've been working here for more than 20 years, sir. Since I was a teenager, she answered me. How do you think about the Wallace family? Do you like working here? Any complaints so far about how they have been treating you? I asked her again and tried to study her reaction. I saw a little bit of hesitation in her answering my question. She looked like she was trying to avoid eye contact with me. There's no complaint, sir. I like working for the Wallace. She answered me quickly. Can you tell me about the late Mr. Benjamin Wallace? I asked her again, hoping to learn whether she had a favorable or unfavorable impression of the victim. Mr. Benjamin was a nice person, though I never had much of a chance to speak with him since he was rarely home. However, he always showed respect to the staff, and I believe he was a very admirable young master. She answered me with no sign of hesitation in her opinion about the late young master. I asked her with more pressure, have you ever had some kind of disagreement with the late young master? And I saw she seemed confused with my question. No, sir. I could say I had never dealt directly with Mr. Benjamin. Even if he had complaints about my work or one of the servants, he usually conveyed his complaints through Mr. Morrison. But it was very rare. He almost never complained about anything. Very well. I understand you were in charge of the dinner table arrangement that night. I began, leaning forward. Yes, sir. I was the one who arranged the table settings and made sure that dinnerware, crystal glasses, and silverware were in order. It's my responsibility. Mrs. Thompson replied, her voice steady but tinged with an undercurrent of sadness. And you knew exactly where Mr. Benjamin Wallace was seated, correct? I asked her again. Of course. He sat at the right side of the head of the table, just as always. She didn't hesitate in her answer, her memory sharp. And who assisted you in setting the table that evening? I pressed, watching her carefully. Mrs. Thompson shook her head. No one. I did it alone. It's always been my task to ensure the table is perfect, and I do it myself. I noted her certainty, but I wasn't satisfied yet. Was anyone else present around the table while you were arranging everything? Anyone who might have seen or interacted with the dinnerware? She paused for a moment, her brow furrowing as she thought. There were a few of the other servants, yes, but they didn't help with the table setting. Some were bringing in the flower arrangements, others were tending to the fireplace, and some were just cleaning, mopping, and wiping down the surrounding dining area. Can you remember who was there? I asked, pressing further. Her eyes flickered as she considered it, her mind racing through the busy evening. It's hard to say. Everyone was in and out, attending to their assigned duties, but there was one person I remember distinctly, Lydia. She was the one who brought the logs for the fire. Lydia, I repeated, committing the name to memory. Do you think she could have had access to the table? Could she have seen or touched the dinnerware? Mrs. Thompson frowned, her gaze clouding. She is a young, new servant. Her task was to bring the firewood for the fireplace in the dining room. I'm sure her hands were very dirty at the time from carrying those logs. I don't think she would have dared to touch that clean and shiny dinnerware. Even if she did, I would have known immediately, and I would have reprimanded her on the spot. I don't believe she touched anything on the dining table, sir. But if you ask me if she had access to the dining room, then yes, she did. And so did several other servants. She was busy with the logs, and I was focused on setting the table. I asked her again. After you finished setting the table, did you lock the dining room? No, sir, I never locked the dining room. It's never been locked unless ordered by Mr. Morrison. But we always make sure to close all doors every time we finish the work. It applies to every room in the entire manor, not just the dining room, she answered clearly. I let that sink in before leaning in with more direct questioning. I began, my voice low but firm. Mrs. Thompson, I have to ask you something that may be difficult, but I need you to answer truthfully. Did you poison Mr. Benjamin's dinnerware? She recoiled slightly, her eyes wide with shock. What? Mr. Owen? No, I would never. Her voice shook with genuine indignation. I've been loyal to the Wallace family for over 20 years. I've served them with respect and care. I would never harm young Master Benjamin. Her words were sharp, and her face flushed with anger. She had spent 2 decades in service to the Wallace family, and I could see how deeply the accusation cut her. But I couldn't let my guard down just yet. Mrs. Thompson, someone smeared poison on Benjamin's dinnerware. Someone with access to the table. Someone who knew where he would sit. Mrs. Thompson's lips trembled, but she shook her head fiercely. I don't know, sir. I don't have an answer for that. I swear I didn't poison his plate. I've been loyal to the Wallace family for too long to betray them now. I studied her carefully, looking for any sign of deceit. There was none. Mrs. Thompson's emotions were raw, and it seemed unlikely she would risk everything for something so heinous. But I couldn't rule her out entirely. Not yet. Thank you, Mrs. Thompson, I said, standing up. I think I've got what I need from you for right now. But I'll need to speak with Lydia. You can go back to work, but do not leave the estate until the investigation is finished. Do you understand? She stood as well, her back straight, though there was a weight in her eyes. I understand. Thank you, Mr. Owen. I'll take my leave now. As Mrs. Thompson left the room, I could not help but think that if she was the only one who worked on the table arrangement, it would be clear that she was the one who intentionally poisoned Benjamin. But no, she would not be stupid enough to put herself in such a risky situation. But I had one more lead to follow. Lydia. Perhaps she would hold the key to unlocking the mystery of Benjamin Wallace's death. After my conversation with Mrs. Thompson, I needed to speak with Lydia, the young servant who brought the firewood into the dining room that night. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Came Mr. Morrison's voice from the other side. Mr. Owen, Lydia is here to see you. Thank you, Mr. Morrison, I replied, straightening in my chair. Please send her in. Lydia entered, her small frame stiff with fear. Her wide brown eyes darted nervously around the room, and her hands were trembling slightly as she clasped them together in front of her. She was a new servant, no more than 15, I would guess. Her youth and inexperience were clearly evident in the way she held herself. Please, don't be scared. I'm just here to ask you a few questions. I won't bite, I said, softening my tone as I stood and gestured for her to sit. Her eyes briefly glanced at the chair, but she paused before sitting down, as if she was expecting something worse. It seemed like the fear of being suspected lingered heavily around her. I couldn't blame her. The house was filled with unease after Benjamin's and Rosie's deaths, and the servants probably felt it more than anyone else. I began gently, trying to put her at ease. I understand you were bringing firewood for the fireplace in the dining room that afternoon, the day when Mr. Benjamin Wallace died. Yes, sir, she stammered. I was bringing the logs for the fireplace. Mrs. Thompson asked me to do it. It's my daily task, sir. Do you remember what time you put the logs in the dining room? And while you were there, did you notice anything unusual? Was anyone entering or leaving? Perhaps anything that seemed out of place? Lydia's eyes shifted nervously, her mind working through the question. She seemed hesitant, unsure whether her answer would lead her into trouble. After a long silence, she spoke. I'm not sure what time I was there, but I'm sure it was late in the afternoon, sir. She answered me. Her answer matched what Mrs. Thompson told me earlier. Anyone in particular who stayed a bit longer in there? Standing near the dining table, perhaps? I asked her again and made her try to remember. Mrs. Thompson was the only one arranging the dining table. I also saw several other servants coming in and out of the dining room. Some were cleaning. Others were replacing flower arrangements. It was hard to keep track of each one since we were all busy with our duties. But the one who stood the longest and closest to the dining table was Mrs. Thompson. She answered me. Are you sure there was nothing unusual you saw there? I asked her again. Unusual? No, sir, but I did see someone, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It was Mr. Faulkner. He was talking to Mrs. Thompson while I was arranging the firewood in the dining room. I raised an eyebrow. Mr. Alan Faulkner? The horse trainer? Yes, sir, she replied, nodding. He was talking to Mrs. Thompson while I was placing the firewood. Do you know what they were talking about? I asked Lydia, my voice tinged with keen curiosity. I didn't hear what they were saying, though, but I saw them speaking to each other, she answered me. I leaned back slightly in my chair, making a mental note of the information. Alan Faulkner. Another name on my list of suspects. And now there was something new to consider. Mrs. Thompson had never mentioned him, and that raised a question. What were they talking about? Why had she left out this piece of information? This Mr. Faulkner, did you only see him once in the manor, just at that time in the dining room? I asked Lydia. No, sir. He's a regular visitor. Everyone here knows him. So I don't think it's something unusual if you ask me, she said. I see. So you didn't overhear their conversation? Lydia shook her head. No, sir. I tried to keep my distance, and I didn't want to interrupt them. It wasn't my place. But the last time, I made a trip to the dining room to put the rest of the log there. I didn't see anyone there anymore. The room was empty, and it seemed it was ready. But the door was slightly opened while there was nobody there. I asked Lydia curiously, what if the room was slightly open, but was that strange for you? As I know, sir, we were all being told to always shut the door every time we finished the work. I thought for a moment, weighing her words. Mr. Faulkner and Mrs. Thompson, two people who were both involved in a certain conversation during the dinner preparations. It didn't seem like the proper place for staff to have a personal conversation, and I don't think Mr. Faulkner had anything to do with discussing the dinner arrangements. The omission of this meeting from Mrs. Thompson's account was troubling, and the door was slightly open. I wonder who would dare to allow this to happen if even a new young maid knew the in-house rule to always close the door after finishing their work. Thank you, Lydia. You've been very helpful, I said, my voice firm yet reassuring. She nodded. Her relief was palpable. Thank you, sir. I only want to help. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. You haven't caused any trouble, I assured her. But I may need to speak with you again. Please stay available if I need to ask you anything else. Lydia stood up quickly, eager to leave the tense atmosphere of the room. Of course, sir. I'll be around. As she left, I sat quietly for a moment, reflecting on what she had just revealed. Alan Faulkner and Mrs. Thompson. What were they discussing in the dining room that late afternoon? Why had Mrs. Thompson not mentioned him during our conversation? I couldn't ignore the possibility that there was more to the story than she had let on.